In this video, we're going to explain in depth how the modern state of Israel was created. November 29th marks the birthday of the State of Israel. On this day in 1948, the United Nations officially recognized the establishment of the State of Israel, an event which I'll get to in just a minute. But first, to understand why this date is so important, you need to understand how and why the modern state of Israel came to be. The ancient history of Israel goes back thousands of years. But to keep this video relatively short, let's start in the early 20th century. At that time, most Jews lived under the control of the Ottoman Empire, which ruled over a vast swath of the Middle East. However, starting in the late 19th century, European powers began carving up the region into colonies or areas of influence. Unfortunately for the Jews who lived there, they were largely seen as second-class citizens by their Ottoman rulers, and so many began to look elsewhere for a place to call home. By the turn of the 20th century, nearly 1 million European Jews had immigrated to Ottoman-controlled Palestine. But still they were not free, they lived under Ottoman rule. But with the outbreak of World War I, the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers and the British, who were fighting against them. Once the British captured Jerusalem in 1917, they made a very significant promise to the people of Palestine, both Muslim and Jewish, that if they would fight alongside the British against the Ottomans, upon the empire's defeat, they would have their own independent state. But as the war drew to a close, Britain found itself at a crossroads. On the one hand, it seemed morally right to establish the State of Israel as promised. On the other hand, such a move could potentially cause serious problems between Britain and its large Muslim population. In the end, Britain decided to play both sides, agreeing to the plan while also working behind the scenes to prevent it from happening. And so we come to the 1920s and 30s, when Britain officially controlled Palestine. Despite the Balfour Declaration, Jews from all over the world continued to migrate to Palestine, but they weren't exactly welcomed with open arms by the Arabs who already lived there. And so in 1929, fighting broke out. This would become known as the Arab Revolt of 1929, and the purpose of the revolt was to drive the Zionist Jews out of Palestine. Over the next decade, the violence would only grow. And in response, Britain cracked down hard, killing hundreds of protesters and detaining thousands more. It became clear to the Jews that they could no longer rely on Britain. If they wanted a state of their own, they would have to take matters into their own hands. And so a group known as the Jewish Agency began training Jewish paramilitaries to defend against attacks by Arabs. But the Arabs were also forming militias of their own. And as the fighting intensified, it became obvious that a full-blown war was imminent. In 1947, Britain finally decided it was time to leave. And so they put the question of what to do with Palestine before the United Nations. The UN proposed a plan to partition Palestine into two separate states, one Jewish and one Arab. Both the Arabs and Jews rejected the plan, but the UN went ahead with it anyway. And on May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was officially proclaimed. However, the Arab nations didn't recognize Israel's right to exist. And just 5 days later, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Syria sent their armies across the border to take over the new state. But as it turned out, the new Israeli Defense Forces were ready for them. And within weeks, the Israelis were pushing the Arab armies back. By September, the fighting had largely come to an end. But not all of the Arab armies were pushed back. Transjordan, for example, held onto territory in the west and north of the new state of Israel, which remained there until 1967, but that's a story for another video. By 1949, the dust had settled and the world finally recognized the State of Israel. During the fighting, however, the lives of hundreds of thousands of people were uprooted. Hundreds of thousands of Arabs fled or were forced to leave Israel, and many Jews from surrounding Arab states also made their way to the new country. Today, Israel is home to nearly 8 million people, 2/3 of whom are Jewish and 1/3 of whom are Arab. Against all odds, they had established their own state, but around the world, many were outraged. Here in the United States, people marched in the streets of New York City calling for the new state to be destroyed, but not everyone was against Israel. Christians made up a small percentage of those who supported the new state because they believed that the Bible foretold of a Jewish homeland in the region. And so many American Christians began praying for the success of Israel. In the decades since, support from American Christians has played a key role in ensuring Israel's survival. Today, 76% of Americans support Israel, and it's one of the few countries whose existence is explicitly mentioned in the United States. But not everyone was so happy about the creation of the State of Israel. For Palestinians, the founding of Israel meant that their dream of an independent state was crushed. Instead, they were relegated to second-class status in neighboring Jordan and Egypt. Worse yet, many Palestinians living in the new state of Israel were forced to flee or were expelled during the fighting. Since then, Palestinians have launched attack after attack against the state of Israel. And Israel has responded with even greater force, crushing Palestinian hopes for independence. As a result, the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory continues to this very day. But not everyone thinks it's right for Israel to occupy Palestinian territory. And the international community has repeatedly called for the creation of a Palestinian state. Some Israelis also believe that a two-state solution is impossible and that Israel should rule over all of the territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, but that's a topic for another video. The point here is that the founding of the State of Israel had repercussions which continue to be felt today. There are ongoing political disputes, terrorist attacks, protests, and calls for boycotts. But despite all this, Israel remains strong and continues to thrive. One of the reasons for this is that Israel is a democracy, something which doesn't always go hand in hand with the way that religion is practiced in other parts of the world. Israel allows freedom of worship, freedom of speech and the press, as well as the right to vote, all things which help to ensure that the country will continue to thrive in the decades to come. Today, Israel is celebrating its 74th birthday. Much has happened in 74 years. 1948 was a very different world than the world we live in today. Much of the Middle East has changed dramatically. Entire countries have risen and fallen, but through it all, Israel has remained. For some, Israel's existence is a biblical reality. For others, it's a geopolitical necessity. But regardless of how it came to be, one thing is certain, the State of Israel is here to stay. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider making a tax-deductible donation. It really helps us out, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next video.